Notice that this strata is dead level. Notice all these layers are dead level. This is common in all the geologic column, all over the world. It's all the same, or very similar to that. You see dead level. Now occasionally you will see upwarping or synclines or something, but it was laid down flat. Now, this strata here was eaten out by the Colorado River or by a flood that came out from lakes that were laid down, that were left behind after the flood due to rising mountain barriers and also volcanic ash, which eventually broke down and this water flooded this area and cut through here. But you'll notice that there are no canyons like this in this strata or anywhere in the fossil geologic column. They're all dead level because there was a tremendous amount of water that had to deposit them in flat layers, which is not being deposited today because it's all being deposited in mountains and valleys and things, and you never see the huge amounts of flat level deposit going for hundreds, thousands of miles. You don't see this going on at all anymore. The only thing you see is deposits like the material washed out of here. And you'll see the same thing when you look at what rain does when it produces, when it eats into the ground and causes erosion. And the big difference between this strata here and the material washed out of the canyon is this here, this canyon, is formed by erosion. This was formed by deposition, entirely the opposite. And yet there's no erosion throughout these, all the way from the Cambrian to the Permian. And it's also found in the Mesozoic. It's found even in the Cenozoic, where you see layers that are flat being deposited one right after another. That proves that this is not deposit slowly. This is a catastrophic deposit, and it is not going on today. This is the lecture I presented at the Institute for Creation Research and Creation Research Society Conference in Texas on August 1st, 2015 in Dallas, Texas. This is a picture of my book number 1. Originally I wrote it as one book, then I had to divide it up into 2 books. This is book number 1, which is based on fossils, geology, meteorite impacts, and the Nephilim. This is my second book, which is Mysteries of History Revealed, Part 2, History of the Nephilim and the Rebuilding of Babel. Now, the world was perfect when God created it, then sin introduced chaos. Planets and galaxies move by intricate precision, but the asteroid and meteorite impacts are not part of this perfect design. There was an asteroid impact that triggered the fountains of the deep, triggering the flood. I found evidence that the Chicxulub impacts and others triggered the flood of Noah. Not just Chicxulub, but others. Radiometric dating system is false. The Cretaceous cataclysm did not occur 65 million years ago. In fact, the dating system, which I document in my book, is totally erroneous. And many secular scientists have come to that conclusion. From the biblical standpoint, we believe it occurred approximately in 2347 BC. And this impact released the subterranean waters under pressure, and it was more than just one impact in the Yucatan Peninsula. There have been a lot of large meteorite impacts, but they have been placed back in the Precambrian, some of them. We know that this dating system is false. Radiometric dating, when they date, like say, Mount St. Helens, which erupted in 1980, has been dated at millions of years old. But there were no impacts. We know there were no impacts before the flood, which means they occurred either triggering the flood, at the time of the flood, or after the flood. And these impacts triggered the flood. And there are many uneroded craters. There are 174 of them. Since the flood occurred in 2347 BC, and these are uneroded, it shows these were post-flood impacts. And many of these were as large as Chicxulub or larger. There's Papagay, Siberia, which is the size of Chicxulub, 120 miles in diameter. Then there's the Verdefort, South African impact crater, which is 187 miles in diameter. And then there's Sudbury, which is 155 miles. This created an iridium layer worldwide, which triggered the Noachian flood. And most of the evidence indicates that the fossil strata, the geologic column below this line, are flood deposits during the year-long flood, while those strata above are post-flood. However, there is some mixing here, and they have found some dinosaurs above this iridium layer. So it is not precisely a flat layer that you can as a cutoff period. This is the KT boundary here. This is an ash layer. It also contains iridium and other elements. And here's a picture of a typical, and now this contains not only iridium from meteorite impact, it also contains iridium from volcanic eruptions and volcanic material as well. And this is how it appears at the KT Cretaceous boundary. But here is another ash layer, which is found in the, I believe it's found in Long Canyon, no, Trinidad State Park. That was found, this previous one was found in Long Canyon in Trinidad State Park, Colorado. And it shows the KT boundary. Now this here is a volcanic ash layer found in typical during the periods during the Mesozoic, which contains dinosaur bones. And you can see this is a picture from the Smithsonian, which shows a pure volcanic ash layer right in here. However, they don't mention that all these other layers here contain volcanic ash, which is called bentonite or montmorillonite, but it's mixed with water-deposited sediment. But this is a pure volcanic ash layer, which is very common in all fossil strata. Here is the crater of, this is the Ontario, Canada crater. And you can see the crater here, and you can see the splatter zone out here, and the mines here, where they mine in Sudbury. They mine nickel there. Nickel is very rare on the Earth, however, it is very common in meteorites. And that's where all of our nickels come from, as well as nickel for other things. And here are the mines. Now, if you look here, you can see the city streets here and all these houses. And over here, they're like Lilliputians. Now, this is the this is a Verdefort South African crater. Now, Sudbury is 190 miles in diameter, which is larger than Chicxulub, but it's dated as Precambrian. Now, we know as creationists that Precambrian never existed. This was during the flood, or the first part of the flood. The Verdefort South African crater is 160 miles in diameter, and that's this one here, and you can see the crater. But if you look real close, you can see there's cities here, and streets, and over here. These little tiny Lilliputians down here, and down here in the middle of the crater. That's a gigantic crater, 160 miles. And it wasn't just the Earth that got hit, also the Moon. And take a look at these. These are craters that they never mention. You see the craters when you get near the surface of the Moon here, these little ones, but they hardly ever mention these. That's a crater right there. This is a crater. This one. This. And in here, that's a huge crater. That's about half the size of the United States. Where are those craters on Earth? If they're on the Moon, you know they're on the Earth too. On the odd thing about this is all basaltic lava. Now, the Moon doesn't have volcanic eruptions like the Earth does from volcanoes. It comes from meteorite impacts. However, they have found that the moon is still warm inside because it's indicated by the moonquakes. They left a seismograph on the moon, and for several months they recorded the moonquakes, which indicates that it's geologically active. The odd thing is that these are basaltic lava, and the largest craters were formed on this side of the moon, which always faces towards the Earth. The other side always faces away from the Earth, so you can't see it. The other side of the moon has more craters, but they're smaller. One of them has some basalt lava in it, but most of them don't have lava. It's entirely different. Another odd thing about the moon is it's the perfect size to cover the sun in order to make eclipses, which no other planet has. It's like it was designed, because it's actually the same size relatively by distance, even though it's much smaller than the sun. They're relatively the same size, so when there's an eclipse, it perfectly covers the sun. And of course, God said He made the sun and moon and the stars to be signs and for seasons and for prophetic occurrences. Now, another odd thing about the moon is when they landed on the moon, there were little tiny craters that as the craft landed, the sand blew over them and covered them. And these are little tiny craters, and they're just all over the place. These craters are all over the place, and wherever you go to meteor crater like Odessa crater or the meteor crater in Arizona, you will find meteorites laying all over the ground. When they landed on the moon, they never found even one meteorite. Odd. This is the Grand Canyon, is typical sedimentary strata as part of the geologic column. Notice the flat layer on top. And wherever you are, anywhere in the United States, except for California, which is a highly eroded area, you don't see plateaus in most places. You do some places in California out in the desert, like Yucca Valley up in there. But most places in the United States, you will look in the distance and you will see, like Texas, Utah, and so forth, you will see dead flat mesas in the distance. I believe these are the last layer, and usually it's the KT boundary, Cretaceous, and I believe that was the last layer laid down during the flood. Now, there may be some strata that got washed away. However, they believe that, the evolutionists believe that this canyon is a mile deep, but if you put all of the geologic column together, it should be 100 miles deep if it contained all strata with nothing eroded away. This is only 1% of the geologic column. And up here, it ends off where all the dinosaurs are. This is Permian up here. Just before the dinosaur strata, which is the Mesozoic up here, is all missing. And the evidence indicates that it never existed. Now, Dr. Reynolds from the San Bernardino County Museum was saying that it's a mystery to scientists where all this sediment went, because there's supposed to be 99 miles here missing, plus the canyon itself. Now, out here in the Gulf of California, you've got the Baus Formation, which is the material washed out of the Grand Canyon. Now, this strata here was all deposited in a continuous event over, we believe, a year, according to the flood description in the Bible. And there should be some unconformities if evolutionists are right, and so you should have some Grand Canyons in here. You should have some high amount of erosion, but there are none. They're all dead level. Now, this is very typical of most fossiliferous strata all over the world. It has these dead level layers. However, there are some synclines and anticlines, but originally the strata was laid down level, and then these synclines and anticlines formed later by, compression and such. Now, this strata was laid down clear up to the Permian, from the Cambrian, Precambrian, up into the Permian, and this is all Paleozoic marine deposits of different types and different types of rock. But it ends off right here. Now, this sediment out in the Baus Formation is only a little bit of sediment. Now, all the dinosaur strata is missing, but this is all Paleozoic. And when this stuff washed out into the Baus Formation, what do you find in the Baus Formation? You find elephants, Pleistocene mammals. These are very late. Evolutionists believe that was only about 3 million years ago, while this is supposed to be about, a billion years here. And from the Cambrian, which would be 550 million, clear up to here to the Permian, just before 200 million and so forth. But this all material washed out after these layers formed and was dead level. Then later, after the flood, then this got eroded out, and we believe that that was the time of the Younger Dryas period, according to the evolution scientists, which was also the Clovis period. This was also the time that the Carolina Bays meteor craters were formed. And this, there is an iridium layer and buckyballs and impact quartz and soot from huge burning fires were deposited, very similar to the KT boundary. The only difference is that the flood, when this first impact occurred, was 2348 BC, and we believe this event occurred at the time of Peleg, when the earth was divided. Now, here's another view of the Grand Canyon. You can see the flat layers here and the flat strata below, which was eaten out by a burst dam, which occurred about the time of Peleg, which would be about 2000 BC, when the Younger Dryas period or event occurred. Here is a chart from the Bible that shows the longevity of people, and here's Noah, who lived a long time, and then suddenly his son dropped down and it lost lifespan by 1/3. Then you get out here, it levels out, and then it suddenly drops another third, and this is in the days of Peleg. It says when the earth was divided. And this is, you can see the flat level strata here, and this was the last layer laid down during the flood, and all this was solid rock here in flat layers. Then after the flood, there was marine water left behind, highly mineralized with salts and gypsum and so forth, which is deposited in these dry lakes in the desert. Now, when these dams broke, this water washed out and started down-cutting, less water than had deposited this strata during the flood. Now this occurred after the flood, when this got washed out here and exposed these layers, creating these canyons like Grand Canyon. Now, there were catastrophic occurrences at this time after the flood. You got these, what are called Carolina Bays. The reason they're called Carolina Bays is because they had bay trees growing in them. That doesn't mean that they were a bay. Now, you see another crater here, another one here, and another one here. And these are all over the United States. This is a picture of Carolina, and you can see all these bays here, these circles. And these all have an oblong shape showing the direction from which they came. Now, in these bays, they have found that there is iridium, and these are more independent researchers, because the establishment, just like Meteor Crater and Odessa Crater, they denied that these were impact craters for many, many years, even though they found meteorites all over the place, proving that they were indeed meteors. Formed these craters. They said they were volcanic. Now they still deny the Carolina Bays, but they have found buckyballs, they have found impact quartz, they have found soot from huge worldwide fires. And here's another picture, and each one of these circles is drawn around a crater. And you can see the roads here, and you can see where the water has flowed, erasing some of the craters. Here is a drawing of showing the oblong shape of the different impacts, showing that they came from different directions. Asteroids came in and broke up from different directions. This occurred at the time of the Younger Dryas, about the time of the Clovis culture, and it was also the time of the Pleistocene deposits of mammal bones like those in the tar pits, and also in many other places, as well as Alaska and Siberia. Now this one broke up here and showered this area along the coast of the United States. Here's another one showered from this direction. Here's another one showered this way, and these are from Nebraska, Kansas, New Mexico, Texas, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, and they determined the direction by the shape of the crater. They also found some here off the coast underwater, which were some of the first ones they noticed, and that's all documented in my book. Here's Meteor Crater, and they claim that they only talk about one crater here, which is a mile in diameter. Many of these Carolina bays are larger than Meteor Crater, and it's all documented in my book. There's only 1.5 million of these Carolina bays, all the way into Texas, and this is in Arizona. Now here's Meteor Crater, about a mile in diameter, and I saw what I thought was a crater on the rim looking north, but I found this one to the south. I found this crater right here. Now see how small that is compared to the mile diameter here? It's a very small crater, but it looks like a miniature of the big crater. And some people have told me that this, well, it's probably not a meteor crater because it's probably a karst feature or a collapsed limestone. And I said, well, I studied that in order to determine whether they're meteor craters or not. And the karst features or collapsed limestone holes do not produce the crater effect. They usually have a jumble of rocks in the bottom where they collapse, and they go straight down almost, you know, vertical. But these are craters with sloping sides. Also, the karst features or collapsed limestone do not produce these ridges like this, these upthrust rims. You'll see the shadow here showing this is an upthrust rim here in the sunlight. And you can see the road here. There's the size of a car, would be like that. This is a small crater. But they won't let you go over here to see this. I think they're hiding this. Now here's Meteor Crater again, right here. And here's the Meteor Crater Road coming up here, going up to the highway, quite a ways up there. And this little road here, and right there, there's another crater. And you see it right here. Here's the Meteor Crater Road. Now this thing is very small, not very big, but you see it has an upraised rim as well. And you see it here. See the upraised rim. Now a man would be about the size of some of these bushes here. Now we're going to Odessa, Texas, another meteorite crater site, which has a crater too that they talk about. Here's a Meteor Crater Road coming up here to the museum, and here's the crater right here. Now out here, these roads and things are in oil wells, is what this is. But here's the crater. But what about this over here? There's another crater the same size as this one. And if you look close, you'll see other craters here. There's one there. There. Smaller ones there. And there's a number of them, and I document how many there are and where there are in my book. And it's in book part 1. And here is the museum that you drive up to right here. And here's the crater. Here's the walkway around and the walkway through the crater. And there's upthrust rock here that was upthrust 30 feet from underground. It's Cretaceous, flood deposited, containing lots just loaded with oysters, marine oysters. They're very similar to what is found in Biloxi, where they're dinosaur tracks. It's on top of dinosaur tracks there. But in this crater here, this is Cretaceous marine deposit during the Noachian flood. But the material, the gravel that washed in here during the post-flood, between about 2348 BC, when the flood occurred, about 2000 BC, when Peleg's division occurred, which was the Clovis period, which was the period when the Carolina Bays were formed, over 1.5 million of them in the United States. And here's this crater. Now, I went outside the fence here, and I found craters out here. Now, over here, where I showed you there was another crater, same size as this one, here it is. They never tell you about that one. In all the literature, they talk about that there was either one crater, they imply there was only one, or they say that there may have been 5. But they don't tell you where they are. And also, there's one of them that says there are several. But what I found was that back here, where outside the fence, I found several small craters right in here, maybe 8 or 10 or so, about 20, 30 feet in diameter, just small ones. There were meteorites here and there, and these are definite craters with upthrust rims, which are never mentioned. Now, this is post-flood volcanic ash that's on top of the fossiliferous strata. It's found in a lot of places, like the Mojave Desert, out at Calico Early Man Site. It's also found in Bakersfield on top of Sharktooth Hill, which was all deposited at the same time. And this was, I believe, at the same time as Peleg's division during the Clovis period, at what is called the Younger Dryas, when there was a drought. And there were also volcanic eruptions, there was a change in weather, and also the ice formed at the poles at this time. It's all documented in my book. Now, this is popcorn volcanic ash, because when it gets wet, it expands, and then when it dries out, it shrinks. Now, this is never found in the fossil record. This in the flood record, that is, after the Cretaceous. However, right on top of the Cretaceous, they have found this, but not in the Triassic or Jurassic. But this is found usually in the Quaternary or in the Pleistocene or Miocene or Oligocene strata, which are mostly surface, and it's a different type of fossilization, and also it's a different the bones are not fossilized like dinosaur bones, replaced by silicon and turned into agate. And the bones preserved and soft tissue inside of the agate. Now, this is the volcanic popcorn ash. Now, out there at Bakersfield, where they find the Sharktooth Hill, where they find whalebone, shark teeth. Now, cartilage isn't preserved, usually. And so you very seldom find any cartilage from sharks, but you do find their teeth, and you find whalebone, porpoise, and manatee, and other animals, including fish. They even found some vertebrates, and they find all this bone layer underneath this volcanic ash, and I was out there when they were excavating it in 2015. The LA Museum is doing a dig there, and all these bones are in a silt layer, which is mixed with volcanic ash, and it's covered by, right above the bones, is pure volcanic ash. Now, Fred out of Calico showed us how to determine what is volcanic ash. You put a little bit in your mouth, and if it's gritty, it's because it's ground up quartz, and it's very gritty, and it'll grind your teeth down if you grind very much on it. It's very gritty. That's the scientific test to prove it was volcanic ash. Now, this is a different thing. This is the type of ash that you find in the Triassic. And this guy's from the Smithsonian. Let's see. I believe he's from the Smithsonian. Triassic ash. Lower Triassic. Bill McShale, curator of fossil plants at Smithsonian, North Central Dickens, Texas. And they were collecting Permian fossils, but this is in the lower Triassic, and this is a volcanic ash layer as it appears in the fossil strata layer, not the popcorn stuff that you see in the later deposits. And he's pointing it out right here. Now the rest of this has volcanic ash in it too, and that's why you get these rainbow colors. Because that's different types of iron, different types of oxidation. Sometimes it has copper in it, and it creates these rainbow colors from rhyolite. Now post-flood tends to be basaltic, while before, during the flood, tends to be rhyolitic, and also explosive and underwater. Now here is the Morrison Formation, very typical, and you can see some of the copper in it as well as iron, creating these rainbow colors, and you know there's dinosaur bones in that when you find that. Here's Jurassic also. See the different colors here? Those are produced by different minerals in the volcanic ash. Here is a chart showing the different sizes of people of the Nephilim before the flood, but the Bible doesn't talk much about them. Most of them are talked about after the flood, called the Canaanites, or which were the Nephilim. And here you see a normal human. Here you see Goliath. This one is an Irish giant. I don't know who that is. But this is King Og, which is described in the Bible. He was about 15 feet tall. These are called the Nephilim. Now, it says about King Og was in Deuteronomy 3:11, or the Og king of Bashan was a remnant of the giants. That means that there were larger giants, possibly before the flood, and his bedstead was in the was of iron. Apparently, he had died because they just had his bed on exhibit, but he was about 15 feet tall. It was they give the size of his bed. Now, these were the Nephilim. The Nephilim were descendants of the fallen angels. We don't know exactly how they had offspring, but we do know the facts prove that they did have offspring, whether it's genetic engineering or something else, or where they actually were able to have offspring directly. Henry Morris seems to think goes along with that idea. He was one of their descendants was Nimrod. Nimrod was the one that built Babel and the Tower of Babel in order to reach into heaven, which was they were working on technology to reach the planets just like NASA is today. And NASA today is actually a repeat of the Tower of Babel. And many of the astronauts have actually said that they will become gods. I read a book a long time ago about that was written by some of the astronauts. Now, Nimrod is mentioned in the Bible, but it doesn't mean that is his name. That was what they called him, and Nimrod means the rebellious one. If you go back into ancient history, you find out that he was actually Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh was the mighty hunter. He went into the forest in Lebanon with a friend, and in order to get trees for their lumbering business, because he was building a world trade center where they were trading in trees and gold and silver and pots and pheasants and anything that would sell. He was selling it all over the world, and later the Phoenicians carried that on worldwide, including into North America. Now, when he went into the forest, he was the mighty hunter. He met the giant Humbaba. Now, Nimrod was a giant too. Humbaba its description is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Cedar Mountain in Lebanon. He was a giant humanoid with scales, powerful legs, claws on 3 toes, head with horns, and tail with a serpent's head. This is Humbaba, I believe. It's a Carnotaurus. Now there is a description in the current Creation Matters that had an article on cryptids by Dave Wotzel. And he describes how they found in the New Guinea They are not only finding flying reptiles, but they also have found a theropod dinosaur reported by the natives. And their description, when they looked at pictures, they described, they pointed out some modern animals. They recognized them. And they said, well, what is this unknown animal? And they would point to the T-Rex. Now, most of them pointed to the ceratosaur. The ceratosaur, they believe, is just a male T-Rex. Some paleontologists believe that, because some of them are splitters and some are lumpers, so they gave it a different name when they're a splitter. And the female, of course, of the most species is larger than the male, and it has no horns. So, but they didn't show a picture of a carnotasaur, and the description, they said that it had a flat head. Well, I think they're describing this animal here has a flat head and horns. So I think they're talking about a carnotasaur, the same kind of animal that Nimrod met. And here's a picture of a theropod illustrating that article. The interesting thing is the natives talk about this animal and they identify it, pointing out the picture of a T-Rex type animal. And they say that someone saw it eating a large fish. Now, we'll keep that in mind, and we'll go to the Nazca Plain, where this huge plain, now this can only be seen from the air, because it is marks on the desert, pushing aside the desert varnish rocks, leaving lines on the desert, and they're called the Nazca lines. They produce this and many other figures, and this is the hummingbird. They also have a monkey. They have other things. And this is the same culture that produces the Ika stones, which have dinosaur carvings on them, and they also have it on their textiles and their pottery. And they also have figurines. The Acambaro figurines show dinosaurs and other things. Here is the Ika stones, and you can see here's a Stegosaurus. This is all on one stone. Here's a Triceratops. Here's a sauropod dinosaur with a long neck, and here's a theropod dinosaur, like the carnotasaur. And like the carnotasaur, it's eating a large fish. What a coincidence. Now we're going back to the Nazca Plain, which is the same culture that produced the Ika stones, and we see this. Now von Daniken panned over this in his documentary, but never said anything or commented on it. And there's only one picture that I know of on the internet that has a picture of this particular Nazca line. This is huge. Now what is this? It has a tail in the air, like dinosaurs used to carry their tails. It has a head. It's walking on two bipedal legs with diminutive arms and an eye and a mouth that looks like it has some teeth. That looks like a juvenile T-Rex, and yet nobody mentions that. Here's some of the skulls that are found in Peru, also, same place where all these other things are found, where they have elongate skulls, and they have a larger brain capacity than modern man does. And here's another one. These are casts made by Joe Taylor, and it's showing that not only they have odd shape to their occipital bun, elongated, but also has different suture lines, which are entirely different from normal humans. Here's another one that was found. This was excavated with giants, by coincidence, obviously. And it is obviously a hybrid human with horns. Now these Nephilim went all over the world and they built megalithic structures out of stone. These are literally found everywhere in the world. However, there's a greater number of them in England and in Europe and those countries over there, especially England. But they are also seen all over the world, including California along the coast. The Indians talked about those, and like every place they see these, they ask the natives, and they say that those were built by giants before we arrived. These were the Nephilim that spread throughout the world. Now this is Stonehenge, the most famous of these, and it's connected to Glastonbury, which is another megalithic site, which the Catholics built a cemetery there and bury the descendants of the Nephilim. This, according to now the traditional scientists, of course, are atheists, and so they don't accept anything supernatural. So they say it was probably built by the Druids, or maybe some people before the Druids. They don't really know. But they're ignoring a book called the Chronicles, which was also in Acts and Facts from the Institute for Creation Research, and in there was an article that mentioned the Chronicles, where it says that it was Merlin that built Stonehenge. Now, Merlin was a druid. He was a wizard, and he was a descendant of the Nephilim, along with King Arthur. Now, it says that Merlin, was working under Uther Pendragon, and that he used they imply there was some kind of secret ability to carve and move these stones. Now, I don't believe that Merlin necessarily started this, because they have found ancient ruins that are far older than what we see as Stonehenge, and they are underground. It's a much larger complex than people realize. But it's connected to Glastonbury, and the reason that the traditional scientists reject this Chronicles is simply because it mentions giants. And of course we know that's mythical, so it couldn't be true. And it also mentions dragons. And of course we don't believe in those either, because dinosaurs weren't alive at the time, so it couldn't be that. So they reject the whole book. But the evidence indicates that we do know who built it. It was Merlin. How he did it, we don't know. And here are the remains. Many of these ruins from these megalithic structures are called ziggurats. And they are, especially in South America and Middle America, you have these ziggurats almost everywhere. These are exactly duplicates of these ancient ziggurats in Mesopotamia that were built by Nimrod, the Nephilim. His wife claimed that she had had sex with an extraterrestrial and produced offspring of the gods. This is also true of Alexander the Great, said the same thing. He was a descendant of the gods, which means they were saying that they were Nephilim. And the evidence indicates that Nimrod was a giant. Also, evidence indicates that King Arthur was a giant. But it's never mentioned, because there are people out there who are part of this, who are descendants of the Nephilim, that don't want you to know that. So they came up with these fictitious stories, and they did their best, and I document all this, where historians have said that a lot of this information has been buried and has turned it into myths in order to make people think that King Arthur was just a myth, because there's some important reason they don't want you to know. But this is the remains of a ziggurat, and it could have been the Tower of Babel, or it could be many others. Here is another one. You'll notice it's square and it has steps, and this is in Mesopotamia near Babylon. Now this is identical to those in South America, which also worship the sun god 666. In South America and in ancient Babylon and Mesopotamia, and of course that sun god was Nimrod. He was the archetype, and his wife, of course, was the goddess Venus, Ishtar, Isis, all these goddesses. She was Semiramis, the wife of Nimrod, was the prototype for that. Now here's where all these ziggurats are, where you find these red squares here are in Mesopotamia. These are where all the ziggurats are. Now right in here, this one's named Kish because it was named after the father of Nimrod, which was Cush, which it means the occult or covered. he is the covering god, and he became known as Mercury, the god of the ways. The ways, the megalithic structures, and the ley lines in the earth, which marked out the electromagnetic field of the earth, which is used by demons to contact wizards. And here you see Nippur, and here's Babylon, and somewhere one of these was the remains of the Tower of Babel, which was a temple, a scientific headquarters, a garden, a palace, and a scientific research area and launching pad to reach the planets. Here it says that the Tower of Babel was made by bricks that were heated. And they were heated to high temperatures, and had to have been even hotter than those used for metal. They reached 1,200 degrees centigrade in order to melt the bricks. Now, this wasn't obvious. Ovens producing temperatures of 1,200 degrees centigrade in those days. This was a great technological advancement used to build the Tower of Babel. Now, some of those bricks are still around with us today, which were produced at that time in 2000 BC. Here is Babel bricks from Ashur-Nasrapal, central palace of Meshkan-Shaper. These are the bricks right here. These are stones that were used, that were cooked in those in those ovens. Now, this is a floor in the palace that was produced by melting this silicon sand. Now here is the remains of one of those ziggurats, and I believe that's in Mesopotamia. It was in Mesopotamia, and Meshkan-Shaper. Oh, well, I should say that these bricks that were found that you just saw back here, these were about 80 kilometers south of Baghdad, and Baghdad is where Babylon was. It was about 100 cubic meters of man-made stone. And this is the ruins of Babel Beersheba, and it was near Babel. And you see it's ruins of it. Nobody knows exactly which one of these was the Tower of Babel. Now, in South America, where the Babylonians were scattered at the time of Babel, they built the same pyramids that they built in Mesopotamia, that Nimrod had built. And these are the Mayans and the Incas and others built, and these pyramids, which were identical. These are these ziggurats, which they also worship the sun god and the moon goddess. Now, this worship of the sun god was started in Mesopotamia by Nimrod. Nimrod was the prototype of the sun god, and his wife, Semiramis, was the moon goddess. Now, the difference between this and the Great Pyramid is you'll notice this has steps going up. This indicates this is man using his works to get to heaven. These are stairs to reach the sun god. The Great Pyramid is just the opposite. Now, the 144 white limestone casing stones were removed from the sides of the pyramid. There was 144,000 of them, which were removed to Egypt. And Egypt, of course, is a type in the Bible of the world. And the Bible refers to this as it refers to a pillar that will be a pillar of witness in the last days, and that it will be at the center of Egypt and at the border thereof. Now, this Great Pyramid is in the delta of the Nile, which is right on the border between Upper and Lower Egypt. Now, it was removed, and now people can climb up these stones. Now, they're very difficult because they're huge stones weighing several tons. But man can climb up, and this is corrupt man trying to reach God, claiming to be Christians, climbing up to God using their works. Now, Jesus has not come back, so the tip of the pyramid is missing. And this is symbolic. This pyramid is also referred to where Jesus talked to the Pharisees, calling them serpents. And that was indicating that they were descendants of the Nephilim. And they claimed, and he refers to himself as the tip of the corner which the builders rejected. Now, the stone that was rejected is the tip of the Great Pyramid. Now, you might say, oh, well, I don't know if I believe that. And here's another angle of the pyramid directly overhead. This is the top looking down on it, and this is the surrounding area around it. Here are the dimensions of the pyramid. If it was reduced to inches, it would be 11 inches across the bottom and 7 inches tall to the top. That number 711 is half of pi, which is the squaring of the circle, which represents a 7. If you put equal diameter objects together, it makes a hexagram, or a design like a honeycomb and like many flowers. This number 711 is found throughout the Bible, where the Greek and Hebrew are also numbers as well as letters. And when you add them up, it produces multiples of a particular number, like where it refers to the saved of the earth, that there will be 144,000 of them. That represents 12 squared, or the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 gates of Jerusalem. And the Jerusalem is a cube. It is 12 inches squared, 144 inches. This number is found throughout the Bible whenever it talks of something very spiritually significant. Numbers which are significant are when you add up the letters of a particular phrase in Greek and Hebrew, it will produce multiples of 7, 11, squared numbers, like 12 squared is 144, or cubed numbers are all sacred numbers. Here's the Great Pyramid measurements of, if you do your figuring here, these numbers here would be 7, 11. This is a very significant number because if you take this number and you put a circle, put the moon up here on top of the earth, and then you draw a triangle from the middle of the moon at the equator down to the equator of the earth and draw a line through here, this will produce a 7-11 ratio. So what this is telling us is that this number is found throughout the Bible. It is also found in the Earth-Moon relationship. It's also found in many sacred numbers in things that God created. For example, musical instruments are designed on the design of the ear, which is based on 7-11. The notes, there are 7 notes, and the 8th note is the number of new beginning. It was like the creation 7 days, and of course the next day was the new beginning of a new week. So 8 represents new beginning. And when you have music, you get an octave, which means 8. Every time you go through 7 notes, then you go to the next octave, which is the 8th one, and you start 7 again, A-E, the musical scale is designed on 7s. Now, the frequencies of each note are multiples of the number 11. That's 7-11. Now, these two numbers are prime numbers. Carl Sagan said that if there was an intelligence in the universe, they would try to communicate with us through prime numbers and other things that we recognize as well as them. This is telling us that God designed the earth and the moon, the same one who designed the geometry, the geometrical code throughout the Bible. Every letter has a meaning, from Old through New Testament, in Greek and Hebrew. Now these numbers come about from geometry. You take a triangle, then you take a square, 3, 4, you get 7. If you turn the triangle into a pyramid, then you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is a number of grace, represents Jesus, represents the tip of the pyramid. And Jesus said to the Pharisees, he says, he indicated that he was the stone that the builders rejected. That means the masons, the Pharisees, were the masons of their day. They were descendants of the Nephilim, from bloodlines, from mixing with Gentiles. So this, you add this up to the New Jerusalem, which is 6 sides, adds up to 11. These are 2-dimensional geometry. This is 3-dimensional geometry. This represents earthly geometry, spiritual perfection from an earthly viewpoint of the saved of the earth. Now, this represents 3-dimensional, which represents the spiritual realm, heaven. So that's 7, 11. Now, this goes into the more satanic side, where Satan has copied God's sacred numbers. These numbers all are 35. Now, the ancient Egyptians, who were the ones that invented, or should I say, used this system to identify their highest god. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, up to 35. Now, when you add these numbers up, it's called a magic square. You can add them up, and it becomes 111. This direction, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, and this way, 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 and this way, this way, this way, and this way. If you add all these up, which means they're not random numbers, if you add all these up, it adds up to 666. And that's how they identified their highest sun god, Ra. He was the god who puts himself above all other gods. It indicates the reason the Bible refers to this and says that he is a number of a man. His number is 666. This comes from ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptian rulers were descendants of the Nephilim. They came from the Canaanites, through the Phoenicians, through the Egyptians, to the Mayans and the Arabs, and many different races had this Nephilim mixing. This was the seed of the serpent that Jesus had to, his line had to stay away from that, and that was the reason that Jesus descended through to Mary through Nathan rather than Solomon. Now the Masons say they are descendants of the Nephilim. They say they were descended from the builders of the temple, the Pharisees, who descended from Solomon. Solomon's race was cursed. It came through Joseph. Jesus wasn't conceived by Joseph. He was conceived by the Holy Spirit, and Mary from Nathan. But being he was coming from Joseph, as he was considered his father, that made him of the lineage of Solomon as well as Nathan. Now here is how the pyramid was designed. And you remember 7-11 ratio? Well, here's where the 7 comes from. It's actually, I believe, it's the basic geometry of space and time. You take equal diameter objects and push them together, and they'll produce a circle. I believe this circle represents a rainbow. It represents 7. It represents spiritual perfection. And when you keep adding numbers, you add 6 more. Then you get this. Then 6 more, and you get this. And I found documentation from Bollinger that this is how they got the Great Pyramid angle correct. Because it goes all the way up to 35. 35 comes from the ancient Egyptian astrology, where they had the 12 signs of the constellations. They divided them up into 3 decans each, which adds up to 36. And that's where you get the key number to 36, which is the magic square or triangular form of 666, which represents the Nephilim. Now we come to this symbol. Now I discovered the key to more number codes in the Bible. The Bible refers to Antichrist as being 666. Well, also the number 23 is a magic square. And you add up 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, so forth. And it has a magic square too. But that number is 276. And everywhere in the Bible where it refers to hell, demons, or Satan, it comes out to be a multiple of 276. And the reference to the 666, that reference in the Bible is also a multiple of 666 and 276. Now, when I was researching, this is long before the Da Vinci Code or the Passover plot or all these things that claim that Jesus' lineage came from the French Merovingians and was the lineage of Jesus. That's not true. It's actually the lineage of the Antichrist from the Nephilim, from Nimrod, from Cain. Now, what put me onto this is kind of interesting, because I was looking at pictures of UFOs. And on the bottom of a UFO, and I believe it was France, Europe anyway, there was this dark symbol on the bottom. This. Now, I knew that the Illuminati had caused the French Revolution in order to put a Merovingian back on the throne and to get revenge. And that was because he was executed and taken off the throne. But he was a descendant of the Nephilim. Now this is, I saw this on the bottom of a plate, just like the one on the UFO, and I said there's a meaning, significance to that. So when I saw it on the bottom of the plate, it said fleur de lis. I looked it up and it said it's the symbol of the French royal family of Merovingians. I said, whoa, absolutely right. That's the Illuminati. Those are the Knights Templar Masons. This is their symbol of the Merovingian lineage. And by the way, I knew a lot about it because my mother had told me about my ancestry through her lineage, which went directly to, my great-great-grandfather was J.P. Morgan, who was the international bankster, who was the head of the Illuminati, working under Rothschild. And Rothschild means defender of the royal bloodline of Merovingians, the lineage of the Antichrist, the phony Christ. And that's what the Da Vinci Code is based on, the phony Christ. Now, this is the seed of the serpent, where it talks about the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. God tried to keep it pure from being contaminated with Nephilim bloodlines and genetics, because they are hybrids. And in ancient times, they used to have odd skull shapes and double row set of teeth, 6 fingers. They were giants. Now, this symbol is also found in ancient Egypt. There's the symbol right there. It's also found among the Mayans. Here's a Mayan. Here's the fleur de lis up there. Now, this is all documented by scientific records in my books. Book 1, which mostly concentrates on science, and my book 2, which concentrates more on history and tells a lot about the Nephilim. Now, I wanted to say one more thing before I end. No. I guess I'll end right here. Thank you.